The 2022 Toronto election is over, and the story that we'll probably be talking about for at least the next 5 or 10 minutes is the voter turnout. It was ghastly. 28, 29%, somewhere in that area. Awful, horrid. Down by almost half from 2014, the last kind of real big competitive election when Rob was running against John Tory and then died and Doug came in, right? That was a big peak. This is a big, big low. It's probably going to be a lot of analysis of why this happened and kind of who's to blame or what's to blame. And I think that there are 3 things that we should look at when we're trying to figure out who and or what to blame. Number 1, a lack of viable candidates. I'm probably going to lose some of you just right there. Hopefully you'll stick with me. Number 2, the media, who all but abandoned this campaign. And then number 3, the really tough one, which is the kind of feeling of helplessness in the exact part of the electorate that's required if we're ever going to get rid of cardboard cutouts like John Tory and do something actually to change the way that we work and live and vote in this city. 3 things. Let me break that down a little bit more. Okay, number 1, lack of viable candidates. And like I said, I know I'm going to lose some of you here. We've all got our faves, right? I voted for somebody too, and they too did not win. So as much as they're my fave, they didn't win. They couldn't pull it out. There was something missing. Chloe Brown, who I voted for, great candidate. I liked her a lot. Someone who I assume was her campaign manager posted on Twitter this morning that they got as far as they did, about 35,000 votes, almost 7% of the vote, on a campaign budget of $500. Well, that's pretty remarkable, honestly, and a testament to Brown as a person. I think most of those votes probably came from those of us who saw Chloe in the 2 debates, where she was far and away the most impressive candidate. Not even close. But ultimately, 35,000, only about 10% of what you need to win against a guy like Tory who's going to pull in 350,000 votes. Gil Peñalosa, also, what a guy, right? Very impressive, extremely impressive resume, but only managed to get about 100,000 votes. And you have to wonder about how far a frugal campaign can get you. You know, I liken it a bit to performance in automobiles, right? It takes X amount of power to get a car going 100 kilometers an hour. And then it takes X to the exponent of Y to get it going 110. And every 10 kilometers per hour above that takes more power than the 10 below. Pushing a rock over a hill, right? You get a rock started up at the start of the bottom of the hill, it's pretty easy. By the time you're trying to get over that crest of that hill, it's that much harder. I think electoral politics is a little bit like that, especially when you're running against an incumbent. You can get a long way. You can do fantastically well relative to your investment on a small campaign budget, but you might not be able to get all the way asking people to print their own signs for you, as Gil Peñalosa did. Very ecologically sound, a good idea, hard to criticize it, but when you're up against an entrenched incumbent, might not be enough. Number 2 is the media. And yeah, the media covered the campaign. But there's a difference, and I think we all kind of know this, between covering something and committing to it. The media did not commit to this campaign. And how do we know? We know because they didn't do any polling. There was a little bit of polling done in early September. There was a little spotty polling done just by polling firms in early October. But the big polls, the ones that you're used to seeing in a federal election or in a provincial election, the Star Leger poll, the CTV Forum poll, the Global News Main Street poll, whatever, right? Where news organizations partner with a polling firm to figure out what's going on in this campaign. That did not happen. It didn't happen. The media abandoned this campaign. They did not care, and it couldn't have been clearer. And that's a drag. It's a drag for the journalists who were on the beat, knowing that the organizations they work for aren't actually that committed to what they're doing. And it's a drag for us, the electorate. So, okay, yeah, electorate didn't turn out, 28, 29% voter turnout. But there were 2 races that were decided by 100 votes, give or take. Did anybody in those ridings know how close those votes were? How close those races were? And if they had known that it was down to 100 votes to defeat a longtime incumbent like Francis Nunziata, might they have turned out in larger numbers? Well, we'll never know. Those are purely academic things for us to consider. We don't know how people would have reacted. It would be nice to know. It'd be nice that we would have had that kind of opportunity, but we'll never know because the media abandoned us on this one. Okay, number 3. This is the tough one. I said it would be the tough one. I don't even have this figured out in my own head. So if you don't either, well, let's take a journey together, shall we? Let's take a journey. If you look back at your life in this city 20 years ago, let's say you've lived in this city over 20 years like I have, and you look back 20 years ago and you say, is the city better off? Am I better off than I was 20 years ago? Is the city more affordable? No. 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 Are the services better? You know, well, the garbage cans are exploding. The TTC is less reliable and more hostile than it's ever been. If you wanted to get your kid into an after-school program, you can pretty much forget it. Any kind of program, honestly. Or you have to, like, compete Hunger Games style to be the first one in line to get your kid into that program. Daycare services, if you're experiencing homelessness, how's life for you in the city now compared to 20 years ago? Well, in that case, maybe it's a push. Except that it's not, and we know from shelter data that more people are being turned away and shelters are more dangerous and less safe than they've been in a long time. So, 20 years of investment in the city of Toronto, maybe even 10 years. You don't even have to have been here for 20 years. Get your head around that. You could have just been here 10 years and things are no better than they were. You can see a noticeable difference between now and 10 years ago. 5 years ago. 20 years, 10 years of commitment, let's say 20, keep running with that, of commitment in this city, voting for this one, voting for that one, voting in large numbers, voting in small numbers, and the city just keeps getting worse. So you can be forgiven for wondering to yourself, why should I stay invested in this thing when I'm getting so little out of it? Well, people are having that conversation in very practical terms. They're leaving the city. They're getting the heck out, especially if they have kids. Families are abandoning Toronto, and who can blame them? In a similar vein, who can blame people for abandoning the democratic process in the city of Toronto? When they're presented with a cardboard cutout business executive incumbent and a couple of challengers they've never really heard of. Who can blame them for staying home? Oh, well, if you don't vote, things will never get better. Yeah, well, I do vote and they keep getting worse. I'm sorry, but that's a legitimate mindset. It's no good way to fix a city, but you can be forgiven for thinking that way. And I can't imagine that we're going to see voting numbers go up in any other order of government. The next federal election or the next provincial election are going to be somehow awe-inspiring in their voter turnout. You keep putting stuff into this system and you get very little back. At some point, you got to check out, if only to preserve your own psychological health. You know things are going to get worse. You know you have no control. You know that you look around and your own lying eyes tell you that the city's falling apart. But John Tory tells you that everything is just fine. And so do most of the councillors who are running on his ticket, if you will. I'm down here in the Don Valley, standing on a walking trail that's been unfinished for years. And when you ask people why it's unfinished, nobody gives you an answer. Just like when you ask why the bus hasn't arrived yet, nobody gives you an answer. The city's not working for us. I mean, it's not working, but it's not working for us. It's more of a running public relations campaign, trying to convince us that things are not that bad and the things that are bad are mostly our own faults. Again, you let that run long enough, it's not really that much of a surprise when people check out. So what's to be done? Presenting all these problems without a solution? Well, you won't last very long on the Rogers board with that attitude, Bubba. We have to change the voting system. We have to change the voting system. In the city of Toronto, ranked ballots. We have to have ranked ballots. We must. We must come up with a system that allows us to unseat incumbents without having to outspend them by 10 to 1. And even then, there's no guarantee. Because incumbents in this city are dug in like a tick. They're our own little special Lyme disease, the incumbents of this city. So we need a new voting system. And things might just be bad enough for us to have a reasonable crack at it, if we can find some order of government that'll take on the cause for us. It's wishful thinking. Any type of big change in 2022 is wishful thinking. Go back to the last section on people just feeling hopeless because they keep trying to do things and nothing ever fucking works out for them. But a new voting system seems to be the only way. You want to re-engage voters, you got to change the game. You want to get people back out to the ballot box, you got to convince them in some way that it's not just going to be more of the same shit all over again. It's not much of a solution insofar as it's not particularly achievable at this time. But listen, I'm beset by the hopelessness just like everybody else. I don't know where to go other than out. I think we maybe all just have to get out.